Well, as you've been hearing, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has announced increases in social grants in line with inflation. The minister says that almost half of the population is currently on some form of grant in the country. Old age, disability, child dependency and war veterans grants will increase by 90 Rand a month. And in April, an additional 10 Rand in October, and child support and foster care grants will only be increased by 20 Rand a month. Now, the special COVID-19 social relief distress grant has been allocated 44 billion Rand for an additional 12 months. Godongwana says that the grant increases are aimed at cushioning the impact of unemployment and the COVID-19 pandemic. To help us unpack the social aspect of this budget, we're now joined by Nkululeko Majozi. He's a social security researcher at the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute. He joins us now via Zoom. Nkululeko, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Good to talk to you again.
Thank you, Peter, and good evening.
All right, so great anticipation for the budget, and I wonder what your thoughts are. Some might say that this was fairly pro-poor.
I would beg to differ.
Wow.
This is a continuation of the austerity budgets that we've seen in previous years. Major cuts again on social spending, particularly on things such as social protection, in particular social assistance. Now, I've just heard you speak about the fact that the minister was claiming that the increase in terms of allocation to social assistance grants is in line with inflation. But if you look at the numbers, if you look closely at the numbers and you look at the 90 rands that has been allocated for the older persons grant and also the war veterans grant, you will see that not only the war veterans grant, but also the disability grant and the care dependency grant, you'll see that it's a nominal increase of 3.7%. Or on the 1,890, and also a nominal increase of 4.7% on the 1,910 rands. Now, in terms of real terms, when you factor in inflation, the impact of inflation, what you see is a real decrease in terms of the value of those grants. For the 1,890 grants, what you see is a 0.6% decrease in real terms. And also for the 1,910 grants, you see almost a percentage decrease in real terms in terms of the value of those grants.
All right, perhaps another way to look at this is you're dealing with a country that's got no money. He couldn't raise more revenue, so he kept taxes level. And in fact, even decreased company tax. So you're starting with less money, and that bit that he did give, perhaps not as high as the 4% plus to keep up with inflation, but certainly a good effort, wouldn't you say?
Well, I mean, we keep on hearing this whole narrative that the country doesn't have money, but I think it's more about what we choose to prioritize. South Africa has been in this humanitarian, social, and also economic crisis before COVID-19. And when COVID-19 hit, it exposed us much more than we had anticipated. And if you look at global responses to COVID-19, you will see that governments have chosen to spend their way out of this crisis. But what we are doing in South Africa is quite the contrary. Our national treasury has chosen to prioritize what it calls fiscal consolidation and debt reduction. But apart from looking at debt as the main source of funding to provide that much needed cushioning and stimulus for the economy. We've done research, and there are a number of proposals that have been put on the table for government to look at. I mean, one particular proposal that comes to mind is some of the assets that are controlled by the PIC. I mean, those assets are to the tune of about 2 trillion rands, and mostly the government employees pension fund accounts for most of those assets. Now, there's no scenario in this country whereby we could wake up and the government would have to pay most of the retirement funds of public sector workers. So now, why not take about 50% of those funds maybe and put them into the economy and fund a basic income grant, for example, which would give a much needed stimulus to the economy, would put money into the hands of South Africans, and it would create movement and activity within the economy, and we would see a multiplier effect from the money that people get from government, money that would be used to create more money and more income for ordinary people.
All right, so if I get you, what you're saying is that whilst it might sound good from the podium, in real terms, the old age, those with disabilities, war vets, are actually going to be more vulnerable after this budget. Exactly,
Peter. Like I said, as I was quoting numbers, it's a real decrease of 0.6% for old people, and also the war veterans, and also it's a 0.97 decrease in terms of real value for the disability grant and also the care dependency grant. So what sounds good from the podium, as the minister was announcing, in real terms, there's a real decline in terms of the value of these grants, and it will affect people and their ability to afford their basic necessities.
All right, so it's great to have some kind of social protection and social benefits. And South Africa, by far and away, compared to other countries on the continent, leading the way. Something in the order of about 50% of people in the country are on some kind of support. It may not be a lot, but that which the fiscus is providing is not sustainable, though, is it, in the long term? What can we do to make sure that everybody's okay, but reduce this burden on Treasury over time?
I mean, in an ideal world, we would like for our economy to create the number of jobs that we need and to create them at the pace and scale that we need them. But in the foreseeable, in the immediate to midterm future, that is not possible in our country, given the structural problems that we have with our economy. Now, one creative efforts, which we have seen also during this COVID-19 pandemic throughout the world, is that some governments have introduced some form of basic income grant or basic income support, and the evidence is there, the research evidence is there that has proven that what people do with a basic income support or a basic income grant goes a long way in terms of creating more income for themselves, and they use the money to invest in productive assets that create more income and more savings for the individual and for the family. Another thing that we've seen in terms of global responses to the COVID-19 is that social protection has been the leading light in terms of responding to this crisis. And governments have spent more on social protection to sort of cushion and provide support to their citizens. So in terms of our response as a country, we also need to look at in a more urgent way, means of introducing a basic income support or a basic income grant.
All right, you talk about unemployment, and we have this issue of graduates struggling to find jobs. A lot of money is being poured into education, higher education in particular. And I wonder if that is going to help the situation, or we're almost creating a bigger problem because we have more and more graduates coming through the system, and at the end of it, there are no jobs waiting.
Well, I mean, Peter, if we look at the statistics, for example, from the last quarterly labor survey from Q3 of 2021, unemployed graduates only constitute about 9.4% of unemployed people. Now, that shows you that having a degree or a diploma or some sort of tertiary education puts you in a better position than someone without a matric or someone with just a matric. So we cannot at any point argue that or entertain the thought that investing in our youth in terms of tertiary education is a fruitless exercise, because there are no jobs waiting for them. It's important to invest in tertiary education. The world is changing. We are now in what they call the fourth industrial revolution, and everything is moving towards technology. So we need to keep pace with that, but at the same time, we need to find ways of getting those people that are not sufficiently skilled more involved in the economy.
All right, we've run out of time, but very briefly, if you were sitting with the finance minister, because I'm getting a sense from you that he's missed a few opportunities here, what's the one thing you think he could have done that could have yielded quite huge returns quickly?
For me, the biggest one is the basic income grant. I think it's fruitless to keep on spending money on the social relief of distress grant. Yes, it's a very important grant, and we need it, and it's played a very crucial role in terms of cushioning people without any form of income. But we need more. You know, the value of the grant is too small. People cannot do much with that grant. So I would say, in place of that grant, the minister needs to, and the government needs to seriously consider the option of implementing a basic income grant.
All right, Nkululeko, always good talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for unpacking particularly the social aspect of this budget. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, so there you go. Some thoughts about the budget, and from a social aspect. The inflation is running at plus 4%, and he's worked out the calculation there, and he says that in real terms, actually, the increases that the minister has given to these social grants is about 3.8%. which means it's below inflation, which means in real terms, people actually are not better off. There's a net loss. But I suppose when it's life and death, some people might say that is what's required. So here's the big number that's on the screen now, 1.77 trillion. In terms of revenue, expenditure sitting at 2.1573 trillion rand. That's the story that the Minister of Finance literally has to work with.